Good evening. My name is Jeri Lynne Johnson, and I am an orchestra conductor. Since the age of 7, when I saw my very first classical concert and fell instantly in love with Beethoven, classical music and orchestras have been my entire world. So much so that even as my teenage friends were dancing to the music of people like Madonna and Michael Jackson and Prince, I was rocking out to the hot sounds of the great maestros like Sir George Solti and Herbert von Karajan and Leonard Bernstein. So once I got old enough to pursue my international maestro lifestyle of jet setting and race car driving, I began to learn and hear that classical music critics and composers were bewailing and bemoaning the impending death of classical music somewhere looming on the horizon. The truth of the matter, however, is that orchestras have known for quite some time that their core audiences were dwindling. What they didn't realize until the League of American Orchestras comprised a study of audience demographic research review in 2010 of why this was happening. What they found was two things. One was that their core audience was comprised of primarily aging baby boomers who were getting older at a rate faster than that of the general population. And orchestras had always assumed that younger people, as they got older, would naturally age into being the new core audience. However, what this study clearly showed was that Gen Xers, as they were getting older, were not filling in those emptying concert seats. So orchestras were not facing a metaphorical death of classical music. They were facing the literal death of classical music audiences. The study, however, did offer a couple of potential solutions. The first, attract and retain younger audiences. The second, attract and retain diverse audiences. So as a young conductor, I was determined I was going to help save classical music, and along with the rest of the industry, we decided to do a lot of projects that were music-focused solutions. And by that I mean we were going to do things like quote-unquote fixed classical music to make it more accessible to people. A lot of these projects involved crossover collaborations between classical music and other genres like rock and hip-hop. Some of these projects involve combining classical music and multimedia productions with other art forms like dance and spoken word. But as I began to do a lot more of these projects, it suddenly dawned on me that perhaps just fixing classical music wasn't going to be enough to save orchestras for the future. And in 2007, 3 significant events made this very clear to me. The first was the historical presidential candidacy of a black man, Barack Obama, and a white woman, Hillary Clinton, for the president of the United States. The second was the appointment of a fiery young conductor by the name of Gustavo Dudamel as the music director of the prestigious Los Angeles Philharmonic. The third was, how shall I say this, a personal and professional event in my life. After beating out hundreds of qualified candidates and being one of 3 finalists for the position of a music director in California, the search director committee chairman simply said to me, "I'm sorry, you just don't look like what our audience expects a conductor to look like. We can't give you this job." I know. So to be honest, after this kind of conflagration of rage burning inside me had kind of slowly simmered down to just, merely a simmering anger, I had this blinding flash of insight, and it was this: that it wasn't classical music that needed fixing, it was orchestras that needed fixing, because they were catering to the tastes, literally, of a dying audience demographic. And so armed with this new insight, I decided I was going to bring sexy back to classical music. And I founded the Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra. And my goal for this was to create an orchestra that would serve as kind of a musical laboratory that would, form experiments and kind of execute my ideas that changing an orchestra could help revitalize classical music. And it was also my hope that other orchestras would see the work that Black Pearl was doing and then emulate it in their communities. And I was going to do that in 2 simple ways. I was going to fix 2 things. One was the lack of diversity in orchestras, and second was the lack of audience engagement. So the first fix was very simple. I had a simple theory. If you have a younger, more diverse orchestra, you'll probably attract a younger, more diverse audience. And quality to this end was extremely important. I hired Latino, African American, Asian American, Caucasian American, even Middle Eastern Americans. Then we all came from Juilliard, from Curtis, from Peabody, from the top conservatories around the world, and I hired them in my orchestra. The second, audience engagement, was a much more important concept, and this meant that orchestras should no longer hold audiences at arm's length, but rather welcome them into the classical music experience. And towards that end, I formulated something that I called I Conduct. And this was simply the goal of putting an orchestra baton in every single man, woman, and child's hand in the city of Philadelphia. And as you can see, we were quite successful and reached a lot of places, train stations, art museums, even City Hall, and this was one of the results. This gentleman will not take off his bike helmet. He's afraid that if he does too badly, the orchestra will pelt him with all this. So I'm down in the corner kind of giving him hints about what he should do. As you can see, he's thoroughly enjoying himself. People are just straight out laughing in the audience. This is the critical moment coming up. He will not give up the baton. So he goes on. So, all of these experiences with Black Pearl and dealing with lack of diversity and lack of engagement led to 3 lessons. One was that clearly Americans are suffering from a silent pandemic of megalomania in America, as evidenced by this gentleman. The second is that these ideas work. Black Pearl Chamber Orchestra concerts have a 50% audience development rate of African Americans in the audience. This is unheard of for classical music audiences. And we know these ideas are working because now other orchestras are picking them up. As you can see here, when our lovely neighbors, the Philadelphia Orchestra, picked up our I Conduct idea very recently at a concert that they did in Kimmel Center. And the most important lesson, and I think for all classical music and arts organizations, is this: that when the arts genuinely engage the community will genuinely embrace and participate in the arts. Thank you very much.